Welcome to MamaFuel, the podcast that fuels every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully sparks a few dreams along the way. I'm Ann Ferguson, Chief Nurturer and Mama Mentor at the Centered Mama Project, and your host for this podcast. I'll be sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with beautiful mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. This is Ann Ferguson, your host, and I am very excited to share with you a conversation that is very dear to my heart. I'm talking today to Rita Waddell, who is the outgoing head of an incredible facility here near Geneva that supports kids who have dyslexia and other learning differences. A few years ago, our oldest daughter was really struggling at school, and it took a long time and many different professionals before we finally had the diagnosis, which was one of dyslexia. Rita and her team changed our daughter's life for the better, and we could not be more grateful. Even if you don't have a child with dyslexia or a learning difference, I urge you to listen to this episode and to share it as broadly as you can, because up to 20% of all populations have dyslexia or some form of learning difference. That means you definitely have colleagues who are dyslexic. You definitely have colleagues who have some form of learning difference. You have neighbors who do, friends who do, maybe relatives who do. Please listen, because this will really open your mind to different ways of seeing behavior in children. And if you think that one of your children or many of your children may have a learning difference, I urge you to go and seek some support. I also urge you to make sure that you are being taken care of and you're taking care of yourself by making sure that you don't drift off into the shadows. This happens to all of us, but it happens even more for those of us who have one or many children with a particular need. And in our case, it is dyslexia. And it is something that can shunt us even more into the shadows of our own lives, because we really want to make sure that all of our kids have our absolute best and greatest amount of support. But we tend to lose ourselves. So I invite you to come to thecenteredmamaproject.com/illuminate and leave your details there, as I'm getting ready to launch something called Illuminate, as the name suggests, which is a 3-month pilot of a longer program that I've created to help all of the mamas who get lost in the shadows of life come back into the center. I'll have so much more to tell you soon, but in the meantime, make sure you visit thecenteredmamaproject.com/illuminate and pop your name and email in there so that I can send you the details as and when they come together. I'll only be taking a small number of mamas, so if you're interested, make sure you hop in there and leave me your info. Without any further ado, let's dive into today's conversation with Rita Waddell. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. My name is Ann Ferguson, and I, as ever, am your host of this podcast and all the other great episodes that have already been published and hopefully been into your ears. Every one of the guests that I introduce to you is someone who is special to me, or who has inspired me, or who has helped me or my family at some stage along our journey. And today's guest is absolutely no exception. When our first daughter, Nina, started school around age 4, I used to say that she had sparks jumping out of her eyes. She was the most illuminated, joyful, happy, social child I had ever met. I was a little biased, but she was amazing. And other people thought the same. And then she went into school at age 4, as is required here in Geneva. And little by little, that spark started to fade. And what started replacing it was confusion, frustration, fear, and a whole lot of doubt. And over 3 years, we asked Carolina's teachers, should we have her checked for dyslexia? Should we have her checked? Is there an issue? Her reading is slow. And the answer was always, no, you can't know until the children are 7 anyway. And she's fine. She's just on her own rhythm. By the time our daughter was 7, she was telling us that she was so stupid that one day she'd work up the courage to go smash her head against the wall at the back of the garden because her brain was broken and it would never work like everyone else's. That is when we decided that we needed help. We knew it before. We sought out help, and the help that we found here, sadly, wasn't really adequate. And the person that we met told us that our daughter had a mental block around reading, and that now that she had all of the tools after 5 months of working with this person, she was fine and she could just get on with it. We weren't particularly satisfied by this response and took Nina to the UK, where she was assessed by an incredible speech therapist. Her name is Dr. Jenny Thompson at the University of Sheffield, and she was amazing. That's not who we're talking to today, though. The person I'm talking to today was the next huge helper in our journey, because when we came back to Geneva with all of this information, knowing that not only was Carolina dyslexic, she was extremely dyslexic with a very specific type of dyslexia, and two things that just meant that her brain functioned differently. Not worse, not better, just not in a way that traditional schooling was helpful for. And as you can imagine, all parents who have children with a specific need, whether it be health related or learning related or socially related, we started researching like wild things. And my husband was very keen on us heading off to Bali, to the Green School. And we'll maybe talk about that one day. I was not so keen on going to Indonesia, but I was madly keen on seeing if we could get Nina into a very special place nestled between Geneva and Lausanne on the shores of Lake Geneva, a place called Nyon called Oak Hill. And the Oak Hill School is heaven and the lighthouse and a safety buoy and a life-saving team all rolled into one. And when I first went to Oak Hill, I met today's guest. Rita Waddell heard me almost unable to speak in my terror of what do we do for Nina and could she please come here, and was able from the outset to reassure me as a very worried mama who'd watched her child's self-esteem and belief in herself completely disappear. Rita was able to start the process for all of us to heal. And she was absolutely instrumental with the rest of the team at Oak Hill in getting Carolina to the place where she is now. And I'm going to get a bit emotional for the first time on the podcast because I got an email today from Nina's regular classroom teacher saying that she had volunteered, to read in front of her class. And she read 2 whole pages of a grade level book out loud in front of her class. This is the 3rd time she's volunteered in probably 10 days to read in front of the very children whose opinion of her had partially formulated her terror and her certainty that she was completely unworthy and one of the dumbest kids in the world. So it's a big day for us to receive this information, and a perfect day to be talking to you, Rita. And we're so grateful to you as I get all emotional. But yeah, to just talk to you about your path, your career, your experience as a wife and as a mama, because dyslexia has been very present in your life outside of the classroom, but also all of your professional knowledge. So from deep inside my shaky mama's heart, thank you for joining me today on MamaFuel. I'm delighted to have you.
I'm delighted to be here, and I actually feel quite emotional myself listening to that because Oak Hill, the students that we have at Oak Hill, their parents have the same desires for their own children. And because we see parents again and again and again, and students who have very similar profiles, it just really brings it home that every single child and every single family, they are unique and they bring their own unique skills to whatever they do. So it's not just a job, I think, is what I'm trying to say, is that, the involvement in each child's life and their progress and the things that they do and their emotional stability, it's priceless. So, to hear that from a parent, because you always know, yes, these children make progress. We have very good results. We do a lot for their self-esteem, etc., but to actually hear it does make you quite emotional.
Yeah, well, this is the bit of an ambush of my tears, and I'm not an easy crier. I wish I was, because it feels good to let it go. But
and it's a hard call because, when we look at students, and as you know, we look at our students really carefully because, we have a certain profile of student. And we know that for that certain profile of student, our program works. And so for some parents, we say, no, your child is achieving at their cognitive potential. To to hear that and, have that sort of reinforcement that what we do does actually work. It's a big ask from us. We say, yes, in 2 years' time, we will remediate. 2 years, give or take, some a little less, some a little more. We will remediate your child's basic skills, and we will have them reading, if not at grade level, we will have them much, much closer to grade level than their 4-5 years, sometimes more years behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was definitely, literally hot off the computer screen today before we started our recording. I was just reading to Rita what I have just explained to you in the introduction, that Nina's reading out loud in front of the class. And this is something that would have been beyond unthinkable.
Yeah. And they're the hidden things, I think, from our program. Implicitly throughout the program, yes, they read, and yes, they spell, and yes, our students learn to write effectively. But those hidden things, like I've now volunteered to do something, which is something that they would never ever do. The hiding strategies are absolutely amazing. What some of our students would come up with to not read aloud or not be involved in a certain part of a lesson. And sometimes, teachers are not aware that they're super smart. The strategies they develop are very complex sometimes and hard to spot, but strategies they are indeed.
Yeah.
And, they are the mechanisms that they put in place to protect themselves from failure generally.
Yeah, so I want to dig into all of that stuff. But before we get started on that, tell us a little bit about what your life looks like right now. It's how I like to start my podcast.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm looking out my window, and what was a beautiful view of the Jura is now being absolutely obliterated by a brand new school. So I'm here in Nyon. There's a brand new public school being built right opposite our very small school. Which will be good for us. I think in the long run, we'll have a lot more people here. So I'm in Nyon. I am here on my own at the moment. My husband is in France, and he is working on a house that we've had for quite some time in the Limousin in France, and which is where I will probably retire to. I'm English, although I probably will not spend a lot of time in England. I won't retire to England, I wouldn't have thought. I have, my boys are in the UK. My husband's parents are in the UK. And my mum is in the UK, and they are all within walking distance of each other. So a very, very close community. I met my husband in the local pub. And before we moved to Switzerland, we had never been out of where we were born and where we bought our houses and where we worked. So this was a big move for us when we came here 8 years ago. But a really good move. I've loved the time we've spent in Switzerland. It's such a magical place. It has its boundaries, but it's a great place to be. And it's a great job to be in.
So your professional path, because you have a personal experience with dyslexia in your family. Your husband is wildly dyslexic, isn't he?
He has dyslexia, yeah, that's true. I don't know about wildly because he's never had an assessment. We do talk about him having an assessment because I think his difficulty will be with processing speed. Maybe some work in memory, but I think his main difficulty is processing speed. I think one of the domains that they actually assess for his perceptual reasoning, I think will be extremely high. I think he will be extremely high because he looks at pictures and puzzles and can just figure them out really quickly. Now, as I said to you, Anne, he can reroute gas systems, water systems just by looking, which is something I would never, ever be able to do. So he's a big picture sort of thinker. However, his processing speed drives me insane.
What does that mean, though, for people who don't know what processing speed is? What does that mean?
It would take him quite some time to process some information. So, for example, if he was learning French and he learned the word for, I don't know, baguette as an easy one, he could look at a picture of a baguette. He could hear the word baguette. He could look at the word baguette. You could split it up into syllables, baguette, and you could ask him the next day, what is this picture? And he would say, don't know, forgotten. And you might ask him the next day after you've done the same thing again. He would say, I don't know, forgotten. And eventually it will go into his long-term memory. But then you might overload him with other nouns. So you might be teaching him a table or a chair and a book and a comic and things that I would remember with a little bit of overlearning. I would remember those things. And he would then be overloaded with information. So he's forgotten baguette, but now he remembers chair. And so as the information increases, he processes that information more slowly. So sometimes things go too quickly. So he's been asked to learn 10 nouns. Well, I might have got 2 of those. And then the next day something else is added. So he's forgotten that because it's never ever gone into his long-term memory. And it just becomes, it's too hard for me to learn. It's too hard for me to learn. So he doesn't. He realizes that for him, he needs a strategy. And we have discussed it at length. I'm not the right person to ever do any teaching with him. And I don't think that a regular teacher would be. I think if he was going to learn a language, he would learn it verbally. So we wouldn't even look at any of the written conjugations. And he would live with a family. And he would learn to speak French the way he learned to speak English. He would be immersed in that language. He would hear the same, pass me the bread, pass me the salt, pass me this. He would learn those phrases just as he's learned to speak English. And for him, that would be the way into language.
So for you, because you spent years and years of your career where you grew up in a primary school, right? And so you were a primary school teacher. And
in different primary schools,
and we've spoken about how you went from primary school teaching to being in this really, really specialized school. So for people who don't know you, which is going to be most people because we have listeners all over the globe, Oak Hill is an extraordinarily special space because classrooms have a maximum of 4 children and it's really individualized learning. It's heaven for any student, but particularly those that have so much learning trauma, like children with dyslexia and attention deficit who are at Oak Hill. But you and I had a conversation at one point where I said, we kept being told that there's no way of knowing if Nina is dyslexic until she's 7. But we now know that because of working with Jenny Thompson in the UK and a colleague of hers who did a great, for anyone who's listening, there's a great course on a platform called Coursera, COURSERA.org, and you can get free access to university level courses. And if you look up Dr. Jenny Thompson, and I think the title is a super zippy, something like Helping Children who with difficulty learning to read and write. It's a crap title, but the content of this is amazing because it's a course for teachers who work with little kids. And in that course, they say that you can tell with a 6-month-old if they have a predisposition to dyslexia with certain exercises. And you and I have had a conversation where you've said that you can tell even in your reception class, which is 3-year-olds, right? You could tell with those kids really quickly which of them were likely to have a learning difference. Can you tell us, for anyone who's listening, what the things are to look for?
Yeah, I think what you said earlier on, Anne, is really true. Children go into school and it's great. It's all play and we're learning through play, and then all of a sudden we're starting to read and write and do more of those sort of mechanical things. So, for example, in a nursery, you might have somebody who is 3, 4, and they're expected to maybe find their name and pop their name underneath where their coat is. Or you might have a child who doesn't recognise that after the first day or the second day or the third day and never recognises that. So it takes a long, long time. So there are certain sort of indicators. Generally for me as a classroom teacher, it's when you start all of that reading and you have children who come in, and generally, some children come in and they're reading, but generally, if they haven't read at home, then you're all starting from pretty much the same ballpark. They read environmental print. The majority of the class, and my classes were 30. 30 is a normal class where I taught. The majority of them wouldn't be what I would call readers. So they can recognise the name, they recognise McDonald's and things like that. And then you start with the flashcards and all the multisensory and in the sand, and we're doing all this. And they all get the same diet, if you like. very similar, overexposure to sight words, this, that, and the other. And then for some reason, you'll have 4 or 5 who still flashing this out. Oh, well, let's try it this way. Okay, well, let's put in a little bit of extra support. So the classroom assistant or somebody else, anyone, a parent who comes in, 10 minutes, do these flashcards, play this bingo game. Let's look at this. Let's put them on a tree, and let's run for these words, and let's run back when we can find the word said. And then in June, they still can't read the word said. Well, you will have children who will always have difficulties acquiring, written language. So acquiring all of those sight words, for example. And some children that you have are low ability and achieving at low ability. And they are students who are always going to need some sort of learning support. But the profile of a child who has dyslexia, not all of the time, because there are overlays of different need, are generally those students who are super vocal. So they're having conversations with you about all sorts of things at 4 and 5, about dinosaurs and bones and all sorts of wonderful vocabulary. But they still can't read the word said when you've been using flashcards and all sorts of other multisensory ways to try and get in. You have to look back as a teacher and think, have I done the most I can? Because you try to get all different ways for each student to learn, because they will learn differently. But if you can sit back and say, I've tried this and this and this, and I've spoken to this person, and we've tried this and we've tried this, and that hasn't worked, then alarm bells really should be ringing after that first year at school. For me, it would be the first couple of months, because it's rapid. The way they acquire the skills to read, it is rapid. High frequency words, you read them really quickly.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier was that these kids are, on the whole, and again, it's hard to generalize, these kids are really intelligent.
And you can tell.
You can tell. And that's the case with Carolina. I alternate between Nina and Carolina, because when she was little, she would call herself Nina. So for anyone who hasn't heard me mentioning her name, and I haven't before, this is the first time, Nina and Carolina are the same person, but she couldn't say Carolina when she was small, so she likes Nina. And I've lost my train of thought now that I've said, so these kids are super intelligent, but what I think as parents we start maybe to have alarm bells around is different from what you would have had alarm bells around in the classroom. For me, the alarm bells were very much behavioural. Yeah. They were fear of going into the classroom. They were, obviously, when she said to me she wanted to hit her head against the wall because her brain was broken and would never be fixed, that was the most terrifying ever. I mean, it was, as a mother, I still, this is almost 4 years later and I can barely talk about it. So what could parents look for in the feedback they're getting from teachers? Because what we heard was, she's not paying attention. She's not concentrating. She's super smart. She'll get there, but she's really distracted.
Yeah.
Or she keeps looking out the window instead of listening. And I now know that those are really, really smart strategies for someone who's doing everything she can to avoid failure. Because when she tried, it never worked, right? And I remember reading once a stat that children with dyslexia are putting in 400% of the effort and getting 50% of the results compared to children who don't have. So obviously, if someone says to you, run up a mountain in sleet, naked, in the dark, you're going to do everything you can to avoid the mountain, right? Like to get on the side and just lie down because it's too hard. So can you talk a little bit about the kinds of behavioral strategies?
Yeah.
I things that teachers will say that might make you go, ooh.
Yeah, I think it's harder for parents, because as teachers, you get a cohort of children coming in year on year. So you have 30 children come in, you have 30 children leave, you have another 30 children. So you get to see, and you get to be able to sort of identify, and not give a label, but identify and say, this child's this, or this child, because you have that many children coming through that you very quickly realize that something's not quite working in the way I'm teaching this child, or this child is doing this. I wonder why that might be. And I think for parents, especially if they have just one child, they don't have anything else to compare that child with. Mm-hmm. So I think for lots of parents, obviously they listen to what are considered to be professionals. So they would listen to the classroom teacher, or they would listen to somebody else who's working with their child. I think for parents, I would go with your instinct. I would really go with your instinct, because there are professionals there who don't have anything to do with the school, who would give their own professional opinion and advice, and sometimes might want to do an assessment. It's what you do with that assessment, but sometimes, you then have the tool to say, right, okay, this child doesn't have any dyslexia, but wow, I've got a really good profile of my child. I know what their strengths are. We had our youngest son, Harry, assessed, because when we brought him here, we thought, oh, well, he was great in the UK. Now it's not going so great. Just to sort of expand on that, we did put him into the Swiss system, and he didn't have any French. So, there were reasons for that. However, he doesn't have any dyslexia, but the report was really, really useful. Because you could see where his real strengths are. Really, really good verbal comprehension, super smart verbal comprehension. And I think I've said to you, Anne, throughout that report, it says there is no reason why Harry cannot succeed at university level. So when Harry says, and we say, Harry, there is no reason why you can't succeed at university level. It's not because of a learning difference. Yeah. It's because either you can't be bothered or something is too difficult. I don't know, but it's not because of a learning difference. So the report is very useful. I think to listen to your child as well, and to really, talk about, they will change. They will change. As you said, you go skipping into school at 4. You should still be skipping at 7. You should still, and a lot of children are. And we could get into a whole debate about schools and systems, and what are we assessing, and why are we assessing, and the worth of exams, and summative assessment and formative assessment. We could get into the whole realm of those who can, and those who don't. But that doesn't help your child. No. Because that is the system. That is the system. And at the moment, in the UK, you get 3 A-levels with good grades, and you can go to university. If you don't, well, you might be able to do some sort of access course into university, or a BTEC. So there are different things that you can do, obviously. But ultimately, we are a society that is exam-led. And that doesn't suit everybody. No. And that's the thing that we have realized. And one of the things that people listening might not realize is that dyslexia it runs in families. So we had no idea. So my profile was hyper motivated, skipped more grades than I can even, I think by the end of it, I'd skipped something like 4 grades by the end of the school system I was in, because we'd come to France for a while, and they didn't know what to do with all of the learning I'd done in that year. And so they gave me extra points and whatever. When we came back to high school, I went back to high school in Canada. And so for me, academia was a place of achievement, and it was super easy. And it was, the social part was hard. I didn't understand working with kids. And I now understand that was part of the profile that I had, which tied into the intelligence, but socially was like, I don't understand. This is complicated. I don't understand this. Like, why don't people just do what they say and say what they think? And my husband also he's hugely brilliant, and academically had gone all the way. He almost finished his PhD. So academically for us, we just assumed that it would be the same for our kids. And so to see one of our kids, especially, they're both so bright, but to see her so bright and struggling, we were completely without any, we were completely inequipped. I'm speaking of intelligence. I can't say the word right. We were completely, we had nothing. And then it's only then that we realized that one of my husband's sisters
is deeply dyslexic and had struggled and been told she would never amount to anything, and later became a school teacher and a lawyer and a federal politician and, so it's by no means a handicap. What it is, though, is that when you are fed the diet of traditional education, you have an intolerance. It's like having a food intolerance. It just isn't. You're trying to put stuff in a way, in a format that is undigestible by the dyslexic brain. At least that was what I saw with Nina. And when we took her to you and she was accepted into these tiny little cocoon classrooms of amazingness, was her dropping her guard and realizing that, learning this message that you tell to your kids all the time, that it isn't your fault that you're not learning. It's because the way they're teaching you doesn't work for how you learn. Yeah. Oh my God. That just opened the whole world. So can you talk about some of the behavioral strategies that kids will use in the classroom? So we'll often see kids seem like they're misbehaving or having behaviors that are felt to be not acceptable or positive. Can you talk about what the really smart strategies are?
I think there are two things that happen. Generally, it's boys. Research would say that it's generally boys who are noticed for their behaviours. Because they don't want to be seen as different, so they don't want to be seen as not being able to as stupid. So somebody asks a boy in a class to read out loud, they can't do it, so they do something else. Now it will be generally a girl would do something different to a boy, but boys, according to research, are more likely to present with behaviours that would make them the class clown, or I didn't hear you. I've lost the page, or where are we? By which time the teacher might have moved on somewhere else. Girls tend to not present those sort of behaviours, but they would sort of hide. So they would put their head down. They would not make eye contact. I've seen this many times. They might be even doing something completely different as a reading activity. They could be doing something completely different, but when the teacher sort of looks their way, they'll pick up something and really look as if they're really engaged in the activity, when in actual fact, you've just been putting glue on your fingers underneath the table and pressing them to the table. That's what you've been doing for the last 15 minutes. So they do very quickly develop these strategies. Sometimes I want to hide, and sometimes it's, here I am, and I'm going to just be as naughty as possible because then the teacher won't ask me to do anything. And that's what happens. And sometimes we have to unpick those behaviours and say, well, this child is behaving like this because of the dyslexia, or because of they feel inadequate and not able to do something, or this child is behaving like this because he does have a real difficulty with behaviour. You have to sort of unravel those. But I would say that a child who goes into school and doesn't have any difficulty with behaviour at 4 and 5 shouldn't have a difficulty with behaviour at 7 and 8. Unless there's been something that really impacted upon their life during that small time. But, generally, you have a well-rounded child who starts school. You should have a well-rounded child who finishes.
Yeah. And that was definitely, we just watched the sparks go out completely.
Yeah. You hear, what was that? Can you say that again? Oh, I thought you said, they try to put the blame back onto somebody else. Oh, I thought you said this, rather than be wrong. And here at OK, we take the blame for everything. You know that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't articulate that properly. Let me say that again. Because that is what they're doing. They're trying to mask the fact that they don't know. It's not that they haven't heard or they haven't understood. Maybe they haven't processed it. Maybe they have got too much information to process in their working memory, overloaded. And so straight away, they go, oh, can you say that again? Or I thought you said, or did you say this? They're looking for time.
Another thing that I we realized with Nina, and it's something that as she was getting ready to leave Oak Hill, which was a really scary thing for her, for everyone whose earbuds were speaking into, the day that we did, there was the beautiful little graduation ceremony for the kids who were leaving at the end of last year. So at time of recording, it was almost a year ago. It was in June of 2017. The team and I agreed that it was time to reintegrate school fully, and Nina felt she wasn't ready. And after that graduation, she literally collapsed on the floor and wept, sobbed for an hour with you and with Mrs. Spencer, and she kept saying, I'm not ready. And the whole drive home, which was about half an hour, she just wept and said, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. And that was really hard for us because we had assessed and taken a decision that, well, we're driving to a different city. We're investing a huge amount of money to pay. Like, our savings are being whittled significantly, not whittled, carved with going to Oak Hill. And best use ever of savings. That's what they're for. As my brother said to me, well, that's why you have savings, right? So you can do this kind of thing when you need it. And he was so right. And when he said that to me, I just thought, yeah, exactly. We're so lucky that we could do this for her. And so we drove home and we were thinking, gosh, is it the right time? Is it, what's going on? And how, is it going to work? And so we had put together a user's guide to Nina for her teachers. And Nina had actually written a list of the things that she wanted to ask of her teachers. And even as she went back in with all of the remediation that she'd had and still keeping, close contact with you, one of the things that we noticed was how exhausted she was. And that was something that we probably could have picked up on earlier, that the amount of concentration that dyslexic children use, the amount of energy that they use, calories, actual physical calories they use to keep their brains functioning, to try and keep up in a world that makes no sense to them, and where no one is in traditional schooling, no one is taking the time to A, notice that they're missing it, and B, help them in a way that makes sense to them, exhausts them. And weirdly, often makes it hard for them to fall asleep. Because, and this is something that a lot of the kids we talked to a lot of the parents at Oak Hill, and they would say to us, our kid has a really hard time sleeping too. And I wonder if it's like with newborns, you have a newborn, and Nina was like this as a newborn too. It's interesting. Very hard to get her to fall asleep. Everything was so overstimulating and so overwhelming that for her to fall asleep required hours of being with us, of nursing, of having our hands on her, of just like she needed the reassurance and to fall asleep. And once she started school, it started again that it was just, I think it's like her brain had overheated and it wasn't letting her sleep. And it's become a little easier towards the end of this school year. So she's now a few weeks away from finishing her first full school year back in her school. And we have a language therapist working with her in French because she's in bilingual school. We have a master's in language therapy student coming to the school to work with her. We were keeping in touch with you at the beginning of the year. Like, there's been a lot of support around her, and everybody knows, and everyone's read the rules of the road for working with Nina and the things that she needs. And it's taken probably until the last month for her to finally start sleeping more easily, because it's just like, you can see the smoke coming out of her ears, because she's just, and her teachers have said, she is just trying so hard. She gets socially, it's all good, it's all fitting in, everything is kind of fallen into place. But the effort, and she has said to me, she doesn't have attention deficit. She has challenges with moderating her attention. So sometimes she needs more and she has less, and sometimes she has way more and she needs less. And she says to me, sometimes I tell myself, okay, now concentrate. Okay, now concentrate enough so that we can understand what the teacher's saying. And she's like pressuring herself to concentrate so that she can get it. And that's exhausting for her. So for parents, I would say, look at that too. Like, it's not just the spark going out, which is huge and so terrifying. It's because then you obviously go to, oh my gosh, what's it going to be like when they're older, and where's their life going to go, and what's going to happen, and what happened to this beautiful child that, was so sparky, and now, and you can't help, right? Because you don't have the tools. Look at the fatigue, look at the behavior, and look at the self-talk as well. The way that she would talk about herself completely changed, completely. Like, she was stupid. She was stupid and her brain was broken.
Yeah. I think that's. I mean, obviously, if a daughter of mine came and started using that sort of language, the alarm bells, would definitely be ringing. I think it's important as well, and to say that your experience is your experience here. The UK, and I can only speak for the UK because that's my experience of teaching there, but they have so much more for dyslexia-friendly school status, dyslexia-friendly classrooms, not just dyslexia, all sorts of learning differences. So I think, there might be people who are listening from different places who will get a much different experience of school life than perhaps you have, purely because of the different, the different ways of teaching, the different initiatives that come in through governments at that time. But I know when I left the UK 8-9 years ago, that dyslexia friendly was the norm. You would have teachers who, knew, well, I'm not going to print on this paper. Well, I'm going to use this font. Well, I'm not going to put this up with 2 minutes before the children go. These are the things to look at if my child comes in and they're 4 and they're 5. And, I think having a conversation with those teachers, they would be knowledgeable. And if not, they would most definitely speak to the special needs coordinator, who would definitely have a knowledge around all sorts of different areas of need. So I think it depends where people are listening from, because I'm sure in the US there is masses of support there as well. Yeah.
So if you had some advice to give to parents whose kids maybe have been identified as being dyslexic, or they have a strong suspicion that their kids are dyslexic, what would you recommend as some basic things that they could do to help support their child?
So things to do at home or things to do at school?
Both.
If you're going to do something at home, reading, for example, most parents have ownership over reading because most schools will give a reading book. And it's generally a graded sort of reading book. So you start here and you move up. It's hierarchical. So with reading, I would make sure that it's not just listening to a child read, because a child who can't read said on one page is not going to read said on the next page. It's not going to read on the next page. And really, your child is not doing that to annoy you. You have to take a step back and think, if my child could read this, they would read it. They're really not trying to wind you up in any way, shape or form. They really cannot do it. So I would look at other ways in there. I mean, there are lots of things you can do in reading. You can do 2 minutes of playing with sound. So you can do some rhyming. You can do some... I'm going to talk about things like syllables. So separating words into syllables, just clapping syllables. There are reasons why we make syllable divisions where we make them in English. You don't need to tell them that, but listening to that sort of pattern. So you can do 5 minutes of just simply playing with sounds, changing the first sound. So pig, change the p to a w. We've got wig. Go on to the last sound, go on to the sound in the middle, all sorts of that sort of stuff. Then you can do, 10 minutes of just phonics. So play a phonic bingo game. Cat, have you got cat? Okay, there's cat. Hat, there's hat. Mat, there's mat. Map, there's map. Little bingo games. You can get all of these, download them free from the internet. Just put in free phonic bingo games. They'll all come up. And even before then, you can take out the reading book and just concepts of print. Count how many words are on this page. Count how many letters are in that word. Let's count how many syllables are in the word potato. Let's look at that. Right, let's read the story. I'll read the story first. Takes away all of that pressure of, I won't know this word and I won't know that word. Point out those tricky words. Anticipate what's going to come next. This is there's a cup. There's a cup on there. There's a picture of a cup. It's going to be cup, begins with a K. That's what it's going to be. When you read with phonics, you read in context, so you guess what's going to come next. Picture clues are great. Point to the picture. Eventually, they'll be reading books with no pictures in, so that won't be a strategy. But at first, great strategy. Don't ever, as a parent, think, I've covered up all the pictures because they're reading through the pictures. Great strategy. Let them read through the pictures. It's fantastic. which ones have I done this for? And syntactic. So reading grammatically correct. So I rode the bike is going to be I rode the bike, not I rid the bike, for example. And that would be the last thing I would do. I would read it, I would discuss it, and then I would get the child to read. And there you go, you've got 20 minutes. And you've actually taught them something, not just listening to readers. I hate that term, listening to readers, because it's passive. I'm just listening to someone read. And am I taking notice? Am I? If they get words wrong, maybe I am, but am I doing anything to correct that? Am I actually doing any teaching within that? And you might say, as a parent, parents are the first, teachers. You are your child's first teacher. It's not up to the teacher to teach them. That's their profession, that's their job, obviously. But, a parent in everything in their role in society, everything. You are their teacher.
So true. And this reminds me of another experience that we had, which again is maybe particular to us, but homework became a real a war zone for us.
Homework? Yes.
Homework was let's not even get into the discussion of whether it's worth anything or not, because I don't think it is. But
we could discuss that for a long time. It depends. It depends if it's well differentiated, and if it's there to maybe look at organisation. You do 10 minutes. You have time to do that. But that's what it would have to be. Yeah. Well, sorry because I interrupted you.
No, it wasn't. And what we ended up having was because I had no idea that she was dyslexic, it became an absolute war zone. And that, what you've said, your kids aren't trying to wind you up when they can't read or when they can't do these exercises or when the math seem too complicated. Somehow in the rush of, and this is being a super conscious mama, like in the rush of dinner and the dog and both of the girls and the bath and the bed and all of the stuff, it was really aggravating as someone who never thought for a million years that this might have kicked, it just wasn't even in my universe, and felt like an aggravation of you're so smart, just sit down and concentrate and do it. And realizing afterwards that, wow, actually, it wasn't about that. And the teachers were coming at it from that perspective too. Again, specific. We love our school, but there just isn't the training around dyslexia. So for parents who maybe are in that situation where homework is becoming a war zone, we even brought a third party in. We brought a young student in to come, and she's part of a resource of tutors. So we brought a tutor in to take me out of the equation, because we thought maybe I was the problem of getting frustrated. And sure, it wasn't helping. But actually what was going on underneath was the learning difference. So if you as a parent are having that kind of an experience, again, it's another flag to have those conversations and not be scared. Because one of the things that we were told at our kids' regular school was, the person who was the special needs coordinator at the time said, I'm really pleased that you went to Oak Hill and that you had her assessed and you had these conversations, because a lot of parents feel that there's a big stigma around dyslexia and don't even want to have their kids assessed. And when they do, and they find out that the child is dyslexic, they don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to talk about it. And it's just so terrifying, because you don't know, for some people, dyslexia equals stupidity. And it is so the opposite of that.
It is so the opposite.
So the opposite. They're brilliant, and they have access to, once they learn to hack the system that we non-dyslexics use, they have that plus all of the other stuff that we non-dyslexic people don't have access to, because our brains don't work that way.
Yeah. Most definitely. Because, my husband says to me, it's obvious.
Yeah.
No, not to me. Putting something somewhere, it goes this way, it's obvious. Well, it's not to me. Yeah. So sometimes I can see, things that he finds really easy and obvious, and things that I find really easy. I say, well, it's obvious, it's this and it's this. Well, it's not to me. It's just how we learn differently. And it is fascinating. And, all of our students, they have a diagnosis of dyslexia and or ADHD, as you know, ADD, ADHD, but they're all different. Mm-hmm. They're all totally different. And we have the luxury of being able to say, what was your difficulty there? and they'll say, well, I wasn't concentrating. Well, that's a different difficulty to, I don't know which letters say K at the end of back. That's a total different difficulty. So you're then coming at it from a different angle, if you like, because it's the concentration that's the barrier, not the, I've remembered that CK says K after a short vowel in a single syllable word. So, but we can do that because we have 4 students.
Yeah. And that's not the case, certainly not the case in classrooms. And even still, like our kids are in classrooms of 15 and 18 people. They're half the size of the classrooms that you were used to having in the UK.
Yeah,
and that in Canada, I talk to my friends in Canada in the public system and they have the same. And even in private schools, the classes are bigger. So I recognize that we are in a very privileged position. And, Nina's school has done everything that they can to support her. And her teachers have been phenomenal with the knowledge they have. But it obviously, one can always learn more. And they, if any of them are listening, I'm grateful for everything and for their openness. They've been super open and super adaptive for Nina. Like they changed schedules for the whole class. Like they did a huge amount. They were massive. They were amazing.
I know. And we do work with schools who are really supportive that way, changing timetables.
Yeah.
Because what we don't want our students to do is go back and do the same as what they... Let's go back and do maths, English and writing. Yeah. So it's great that she can do all the things that she really enjoys, like the art and the music and the game,
gym and all that stuff.
Yeah.
No, that's been amazing. But for parents who are not in Geneva or Lausanne, who are looking for resources, do you have anywhere that we can point them? I know there's the Oak Foundation, which has the Oak Hill School in the US, right?
The Hill Centre in the US.
The Hill Centre.
Lots of resources on there. The British Dyslexia Association, the BDA, they would have masses of information. I'm just thinking the IDA, they would have massive, the International Dyslexia Association, they would have masses of information. But, sometimes I sit here and, I work quite a lot. And I sit here sometimes over a weekend and I think, I'm just going to Google, spelling, irregular spelling patterns, free games. And you'll get masses of stuff comes up on games. Reading Mama, which is an American site. They've got lots of stuff and you can download it, you can laminate it, you can print it. Lots of things that are, multisensory. So you're playing with things rather than just sitting and doing the worksheet. And ideas as well for parents, because Reading Mom is obviously for parents, not all women, who are reading or doing other sort of activities around reading with their children. So lots of information. Lots of information. Yeah.
And that's super helpful. And I also just wanted to slip in, because we need to wrap up, that there's one statistic that shocked me and that I repeat to anyone who'll listen to me, is that 10 to 20% of any population has some form of dyslexia. So in a class of 20 kids, that's up to 5 kids. No, yes, up to 5 kids.
Yeah.
Testing my tired math brain. That's up to 5 children out of 20. So if you have 30, that would be more. 7.5 children. And that's a lot of people. So the odds are that even if you are listening and you don't have a dyslexic child, you may have a dyslexic cousin, or you may have a dyslexic neighbor, or a dyslexic colleague, or a dyslexic babysitter, and to just be mindful of that, because people learn in different ways and react in different ways and might not remember things in the same ways, because that short-term memory isn't necessarily always functioning in the same way. So to educate yourself and everyone else around you, and to be open to different ways of that people learn.
I think the main sort of journey we've come on is that sort of 20 years ago, or even longer, somebody who has dyslexia in the classroom just doesn't work hard enough, doesn't work really, really bright, doesn't work hard enough. And I think we've moved on from that to know that, yes, they're really bright and they're really able. And yes, they are actually working very, 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 very hard. Harder than probably the most people in the class. Probably the brightest in the class, to be fair.
Totally.
But they're learning in a different way, and you have to find a way in. And sometimes that's difficult for a classroom teacher with everyone else in the classroom, because a lot of our students need to have overlearning. So they do it again and again and again and again and again till it's gone into the long-term memory.
Yeah. And once it's in there, I can attest. Once it's in there, it's in there. So you, speaking of learning, are off to a French class. So just before you go, I wanted to ask you, as a mama, you're on your own, your boys are far away, your husband's also far away. So you've got time. Where do you get your mama fuel?
I think from work. I think from a feeling of that what I do helps. I think as a teacher, I think you go into the profession to teach. I do still think it's a vocation for many people. It's hard work. Teaching is not, we have 6 weeks off in the summer. My eldest son's a teacher and he works every weekend. So, but I think that here, I know that what I do impacts upon the lives of the students and has a ripple effect on the lives of families and their extended families. So I think it is most definitely a feeling of what I'm doing is I'm doing it to the best of my ability. This is something I know I'm good at. And, I do make a difference.
Oh, you so do.
Whereas in the UK, yes, I was a teacher, but I couldn't make a massive amount of difference. You try and skill somebody else up to do something and then they'd be off sick or they'd have to go and put up a display. And I know every day I do exactly the same thing. It's very varied, but the methodology, what we do is exactly the same day in, day out. We're always here. We do the same thing and we know that it works.
It does.
We know from our website, we graph everything.
Yeah.
Our accountability is massive to our students and our parents. We close that gap. And, it's a big ask because what we say we're going to do, we sometimes think, oh my goodness. But all of our students make significant progress, massive amount of progress.
Yeah. And
one could argue where they will. They come to you every morning. They have a particular program. Of course, they're going to make progress. And yes, other programs probably do very similar things. But for me, I know I make a difference.
Well, as a mama who, I was so scared, and looking at my child and thinking, what is the future for her if her belief becomes so entrenched that she's worthless and stupid? And that is, the day that she went out with my husband, went out for pizza and walked out of the pizza restaurant and looked around and she said, Daddy, the whole city is different. And he said, what do you mean? And she said, look, over there it says this, and over here it says that. Daddy, I can read. I know what it says. Aww. And in that moment, my sobbing husband in front of the pizza restaurant.
He does sob, I have to say.
He's an easy crier. But sobbing in front of the pizza restaurant because this terror was lifted, and I'm getting emotional again, but to have the opportunity, and I know we're so lucky and not every family will have this circumstance in public schools around the world. It's not given to all of us to be able to give this to our kids. And I am endlessly grateful to my husband and the work that he has done so that we can be able to do this for Nina, but also to the Oak Hill Foundation for making it possible, and to Oak Hill for existing, and to Nina for the work that she has done to get herself here with your help. Your work has made a massive difference. And I know that you're on the cusp of changing things and of going to enjoy that house in France with your husband and walking away from this vocation.
Yes. It's a big decision. And, I most definitely would not have left if we hadn't have found somebody who we thought could work with the team, who would be very supportive, who knows his stuff as well, obviously. Because it's not all about, I can teach this program. It's not all about that. Lots of teachers can teach the program, but we are a small team. We're dedicated not just to Oak Hill, but to the actual project, to everything that happens, to being a resource for the community. So anyone can drop by. Yeah, we'll chat with anybody about dyslexia. We know quite a bit. And there's no pressure. We wouldn't say, well, we can only give you 5 minutes of our time. This is going to cost you so much. Our time is free. Come in and chat.
Yeah.
And we sort of felt that it was a long process, that the person that we have appointed will be very good.
Mm.
And so, yes, life's short.
Yep.
We all never say never. You go into sort of a retirement thinking, right, well, I might just relax for a few months. But, you never know what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah,
you never know when somebody might say, oh, can you come and just do a talk on this? Or can you just come and give advice on this? You never ever know where life's going to lead in the end. But I think you do get to an age where certain, friends have left and maybe not reached the age that you're at, and you start to look at your own mortality, I guess.
Sure. Make decisions in a different context.
My mum's 83 and very active, but I've probably seen her twice this year.
Yeah.
Fleetingly. It's not long. And, what she says to me, how are you doing, Mum? I'm fine, but I don't think I've got long left.
Yes,
really?
Oh, bless. Well, I wish you all the best on your journey into the next phase, and we are not letting you go as a family. We are
not at all. As I said, we're not a million miles away.
Yeah, and we're so grateful to you personally as our first touch point. I once was in the hospital in a life-threatening situation, and the first nurse who looked after me, I didn't want to let her go. And someone said to me after, in all situations of trauma, when you get into a situation of help, so a first responder comes, the person who is in the trauma situation grafts onto the first responder and then is terrified to let them go. And that's a bit how we felt about you, that you were our first responder.
Yeah, but when Nina transitioned back full time, that decision's always a difficult decision, but you have to weigh up. She's got the skills now; she can fly on her own.
And
you've got the confidence, and again, it's how that school, welcomes her back. And she was always part of that class. Good transition pack. It's great. It's just great because she was always confident here.
Yeah, she wasn't there. So it's a testament to your work with her, to her huge work, and to Mosaics. It's a school she's at. And
I have to say, Anne, there was a time when she did say, because she did keep in touch, obviously she came to us on a Wednesday, and she said, I think it's time for me to go now.
Yep.
So she made her own decision.
That's right. She was done. Well, speaking of done, you have a French class to get to, and I'm so grateful. Oh gosh,
I'm not conjugating French verbs, am I now?
So grateful to you for taking the time to talk to us on MamaFuel. I wish you all the best, the wind at your back, the sun on your face, and thank you so much for being you and for helping us so much.
Thanks, Anne. Speak soon. Bye.
I hope you found today's episode inspiring, informative, and helpful. Every time I talk to Rita about our journey with Carolina, it feels so raw and so freshly emotional, because it was, and it continues to be, as our daughter finds her way through this learning difference and soon into adolescence. It's been a heck of a ride, and Rita and her team have made it unbelievably easier. If you do think that you have someone close to you who may be dyslexic, I urge you to go and check out all of the resources that Rita mentioned online, and also to seek some professional advice, because that is what really turned it around for us and for our daughter. I also want to invite you once again, if you are in that situation of having a child with a learning difference or a special need of any kind, and even if you're not, to hop over to thecenteredmamaproject.com/illuminate, ILLUMINATE. I suddenly didn't know how to spell illuminate. And leave your name and email there, as I will soon be inviting mamas into a very small group to go through 3 months of gorgeous, deep transformation that will help you step back into the center stage and into the light of your life. I would love to have you join us. So make sure you head over to thecenteredmamaproject.com/illuminate, which I won't try to spell for you again. And I can't wait to hear from you. Lots of love, and see you next week. That's it for today's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. To join us, go to www.thecenteredmamaproject.com/Facebook and make sure you say hi when you get there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little mama fuel, I'd love you to share this episode and to rate and leave a review. Every comment helps, and it is always a delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.